Mass Effect has ruined any sense of self-preservation when it comes to alien women, at least for me. Of course, that can be taken back further and arguably be attributed to Star Wars or possibly even Star Trek with its green women. That's right, I do know about the green women. You see, when dealing with aliens, it's not always all natural and mismatching enzymes, according to that one Quarian in the bar when she was talking about a human hitting on her. It probably would have been me, Tally best girl. No, sometimes it's about an alien who will shoot her tongue through the back of your head as everything starts going full 18+ anime, as it's using a human facade to allow her to get close to human males in order to take over the planet. In the blessed era of the 90s, before life got incredibly lame, although again arguably it may have been lame the whole time, SETI, or the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, would receive a signal from space neatly encoded and housing information on how to add to our own genetic profile. So obviously the scientists did the smart thing and immediately slammed that thing into an embryo, forever altering the creature and creating something that was capable of completely destroying every piece of life on this planet. Now, why would scientists do this? Well, because it came with one good piece of information about creating endless fuel sources that was clean burning, but it works much like a computer virus. You think you're downloading Linkin Park's num.exe on LimeWire, but really what you're doing is downloading a terabyte virus that will completely decimate the family computer. That's sort of like what the plan was for our species. So in today's episode, we will be doing something a little more, seeing as Thanksgiving break is upon us, and I probably bet you're tired of dealing with, the family. We will be covering the Trilogy of Species. I know, bold strategy, because based on performance of my Thanksgiving video, that was bad. But who cares? Let's get into it. So we kick off our story with Species 1, the thing that started it all and really made me confused as to what this organism is based on what it can do later. But we will get to that in the science portion, as it kind of, I guess, does fit together. But it begins with a young adult waking up in a confined bounce house. Now you're probably wondering why I have to call everybody young adults, because if I mention what they actually are, this will just totally get decimated. I don't know why it works that way, but it just does in the site. As she looks around, she's surrounded by scientists and one guy watching on. As the scientists exit the facility, two more are brought in with gas. And it's cyanide, meant to disrupt the body's metabolism and take out the human part of her. The guy goes, LOL, sorry bro, as they then pump in the gas. But surprise, mother trucker, it doesn't work. As he has a nice cry about it, she just straight up yeets out the window. They should have probably been wearing better PPE, because I'm pretty sure a cloth mask isn't gonna save you from cyanide gas. She makes a break for it outside as they begin the chase, but aren't able to catch up with her, as they're not dealing with the average sand warrior anymore. She's able to get on a train and has a dream about a homeless guy attacking her. I don't know, maybe he's just checking on her. It's really unknown, but he gets folded like an omelet, and that's the end of him. The next morning, arriving into town, considering she knows nothing about the world, she's actually operating pretty efficiently. Entering a random room, she checks out a bag and then finds there's a portable TV. Heading to the dining car, she uses her super strength to break into the cash register and steals money, then also steals some food. She pays the attendant that needed money, and then she eats a banana like a total ape. Also, at this point, the Shadow organization has found the homeless dude and figures it must be related to her. This prompts Xavier to put together the most just chef's kiss team I've ever seen. One guy has feelings about people or something. He says he's a friggin' empath, but I suppose it's supposed to be clairvoyance. Then we have Press, who knows how to fire a force multiplier. We'll get to the rest soon, but as the girl eats more food, her body starts changing. She enters a metamorphosis phase as tentacles begin spreading out of her face. Then meeting the other two members of the Feeble Four, we have Dr. Laura, who's a scientist, so I guess she's just smart, and then Dr. Arden, who's a scientist, so I guess he's just smart.
The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
This team actually does kind of suck. And again, Dan responds when meeting them that he's an empath. I think he may be the most underqualified, because as an empath myself, I'm getting the feeling he may be not right for this team. Preston is the only one who does anything. He's basically the person who hunts down people. So the train attendant goes to check on the girl and immediately gets grabbed by a hand from it, and you wouldn't catch me getting near that thing. Okay, this is gonna have to be blurred. A full-grown woman exits the cocoon now, named Syl. Again, I do have to warn you, these movies are basically just softcore the whole time. I never knew about Species, but judging by how fervently people have been requesting me to cover this movie, I'm guessing it was a lot of people's favorite movie during like their late childhood to early teenage years. I can't blame you, it probably would have been mine as well. Moving on, Xavier tells the team the scoop. They have received a signal from space with the promise of clean burning fuel that is easily generated, and with it a sequence of genetic coding that they then spliced into 100 egg cells from a human, added a sperm cell, and boom, created a girl at a massively accelerated rate. Mr. Impact Empath tells us she didn't like being locked up like that. As an empath, Empathy over here shudders as he watches her dream because of what he sees. Again, this team is, my god. So he's brought them all here to track her down and bring her back. Empath Man says that her eyes are up front, so she's a predator. I mean, she's mostly still human. Well, she's not really mostly human, but forward-facing eyes are a human trait. I mean, if anything's mixed with us, it's probably gonna be a predator, right? So now heading over to a hell on earth, if you will, Los Angeles, California, where scholars maintain the translation was lost long ago. She just straight up stole some clothes of the woman that she ganked, and Empath Extraordinaire sees a body on the ground, and I kid you not, he says, something bad must have happened here. Wow, you don't say. They then discuss the cocoon and move on. Heading into the city, again, her name is Syl, she spots a pregnant woman and realizes what she must do. As the rest of the team arrives at the most comfortable hotel, Dr. Laura suggests that they synthesize Syl to learn how to find a weakness. Syl then heads to a hotel room, heading back out as she asks where does she find a man, to which the owner points her where to go. Meanwhile, back in the lab, they start the process of making a new Syl, but the camera cuts out. And something to know about this process is this is actually the pure form of alien. This is not basically mixed with human, so this is what these aliens might actually look like. They head in and then change out the camera, but they accidentally already started the process as cells continue to divide. As they close the case, Butterfingers here drops the bolt to the floor through the grate. The cells keep dividing as Xavier won't let them out for reasons unknown. Seriously, it makes no sense. Like, if they haven't been infected yet and all of that is still in the actual cabinet, the biosafety lab cabinet, just let them out. Anyways, Press goes full ape mode on it with a metal stick. Xavier is following protocol as they ignite the room in flames and take them out, but I guess I should probably preface this, Dr. Laura and Press are let out before that happens. At the club, Syl is let in and has a man talk to her, and as they talk, a woman then shows up and gets his attention. Syl follows her to the bathroom as this is competition. As the woman is in the stall, she just straight up mangles her spine. Oh god, you can't see it, but it's pretty bad. The horrendous quadrio then show up at the club as Syl chooses a random dude and goes home with him. Heading to the rando's house, the group is questioning security about her. Also, what does this dude do to afford a place like this in LA? As he goes to take a shower, Syl follows and he tells her to take off her clothes. But as she gets close, she says nah, but he gets kind of grumpy over it. Gentlemen, never do this stupid crap. She ain't having it, just move on. What, she puts her tongue through the back of his head, and his $1 million Playboy lifestyle is now over. Dr. Laura now suggests that she took out the woman because she believes that she was competition. We also learn that Syl can sense hereditary diseases. This man was a diabetic, which is why she wanted to move on. As Syl drives along, eventually the car runs out of gas, and through happenstance, she gets blasted by a car into a bus stop. Some dude in a cherry red 1965 convertible Mustang, and you can tell by the corral in the front with the bars that run across, the 66 had just the corral. He calls 911 to get help. Mustang boy then starts simping real hard over her, and then puts her medical bills on his credit card. Cannot relate. Would not do that. But as she lays there, she then heals her broken scapula, which alarms the doctor. She walks out and meets a dude as they decide to leave together. Empath gets in the car and pieces together that once it ran out of gas, she walked. No way. This guy is really good. Mustang boy and Syl then take a picture proving that she was there. Press and Dr. Laura start getting close now for reasons unknown. Oh, and this guy, his name is actually Whip. That's the Mustang guy. He gets into the hot tub with this woman and then hears his phone ring and says, oh, I need to go get that. Also can't relate. This guy's just a complete wild card. She tries to take off his swim trunks as Syl says she wants a baby and then begins changing into that thing and takes out Whip tentacle style. Good lord. The group is also being watched by her as they search the area when they arrive. Syl now carjacks a woman saying that she needs help. The group finds the picture confirming that she was there. Syl now has control of the car and the empath for some reason can't feel her. Where's your powers at, bro? Dr. Laura regards Syl as a galactic disease as they head back to the hotel. Going inside, Syl follows Press, but apparently he's the target now. Syl now awakens next to the woman that she carjacked. She cuts off her own thumb and then the other girls to confirm that yes, she is different. She now goes and gets a ton of gas, so Empath Extraordinaire and Dr. Nervous talk about how it's a wild goose chase. A few hobos scare the empath. As he goes outside, Syl just shows up for some reason at the club. I suppose we're supposed to believe it's a plan, but it doesn't literally look like, it looked like an accident. Dan then calls out to the group as they begin giving chase with Syl running off. Seems maybe it was calculated because she drives off a cliff, bails, and lets the carjacked woman go down in flames as they also shoot a literal freaking missile at her for added effect. They think she's gone now, which, nah, she's not. Just that random innocent bystander. Syl then heads back and dyes her hair to avoid being seen as easily. Press and Laura go to dance together as Press says, yeah, most women leave. I mean, if that's the case, there's kind of a common denominator there. Laura likes them broken and dangerous though. Laura comes back saying that she's going to bed and Dan says she likes you as Dan goes upstairs and lets Syl into the elevator unknowingly. Heading to Laura's room, he's being followed. He heads inside and starts hooking up with Dr. Laura, as one does. does. Dr. No Love and Empath sit downstairs as the doctor says he's gonna go hit on those 2 women over there. Ooh, man, he strikes out real bad. I've been there, bro. Happens to the best of us. So he heads upstairs as Syl then enters his room, ready to get frisky. He doesn't ask questions. He's just ready to rock. Oh, by the way, if you didn't know, Dan is an empath, as shown when he falls asleep reading a book. He's awoken by the feelings of someone getting laid premaritally, and this is the greatest injustice to an empath. So he runs and tells on Dr. Strangelove to press. So basically, he's just almost doomed the human race because he wanted to get laid. Because Syl is already showing that she's preggers. She then bursts out of the wall as the group arrives, finding the doctor is finished. Phrasing. They now begin the hunt for her in the sewers. Seeing air bubbles, Xavier is the first to be attacked and brought down. Empathy Man feels that she is nearby and then finds a hole in the wall and says she's in there. Entering the wall, well, she's giving birth, and I didn't need to see an alien doing that. As the group splits up, because of course they do, Dan finds a child in the cave. It's a male, which could be a problem as it can reproduce much faster and has a tongue that can be used to basically spear mice. Dan gets a better look, but then takes the tongue to the shoulder, which is kind of a weird statement. Probably should have just straight used the flamethrower as soon as you saw that kid. Watch, it's just like some random kid lost in a caving accident. Anyways, at this point, Mom shows up screeching. They light the oil on fire by accident as they try to scramble out of there. Syl falls in and they attempt to pull Dan up, but she latches on. Press fires a concussive force detonator through the dome, ending it. Also, a mouse eats some of the alien and now becomes part alien, and that's where it ends. And I watched the whole trilogy. This is never discussed again. But does it really end? No, it doesn't, because now it's Species 2, nothing but horizontal Boogaloo.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
We kick off this thing, like with all good stories, with something that doesn't make a lot of sense, but hey, it is what it is. The companies of the world have come together and not only probably are actually sponsoring this movie, but also sponsored a mission to Mars in the movie. A group of astronauts piloting this entire massive, ridiculously large ship that would take literal dozens of team members to successfully run has made it to Mars. By the way, the group of astronauts, there's 3 of them. Getting down to the surface, one astronaut in particular is known as Patrick. He does the whole spiel about one world, one species, and how stoked they are to have come to Mars. They get their soil sample and immediately turn tail back to Earth, which no. Pretty sure they would be orbiting that planet for a few more days conducting experiments, but bringing him back up, it becomes apparent something is wrong with the soil sample that they collected as it thaws. Coming back to Earth after 182 days, the thing launches its attack, knocking them all out, and I have to question, if this was a soil sample, they don't know what's in the soil sample, wouldn't that container basically be completely sealed, not allowing for anything to escape? Anyways, it doesn't matter, because for 7 minutes, Houston couldn't raise the astronauts. But they've come back to and then head home while a guy yells in a mental hospital about how they shouldn't have gone to Mars. Pretty standard. Coming back to Earth, we meet Syl 2, Eve. Dr. Laura is heading this project. They are exposing her to chemical agents as they try to get her to succumb to anything. Dr. Laura says that the alien biology continues to adapt to everything they throw at it. So okay, let me ask you this. Eve and Laura's relationship is kind of hilarious because it's like a mother-daughter-ish relationship, although Laura is literally trying to destroy her at every turn, and this is apparently fairly painful to Eve. So later on, I'll show you how dumb this is, but for now, the astronauts receive potentially the worst news imaginable. When they get back, they're on quarantine for 10 days, and they can't get laid. It's not a medical quarantine, right? I mean, they're free to go do whatever they want to go do. They just can't get laid. That's not a real quarantine, because what? What if they have an infection? That doesn't make any sense. Why would it just be getting laid? Like, what about actually being infected with a microbe? Anyways, don't think too much about it. The astronauts are now essentially celebrities at a congratulatory gathering. Patrick's father gets up and gloats about how cool he is. Meanwhile, Patrick is getting frisky in the back because every woman is hot and bothered by the first man on Mars. Patrick goes to meet everyone as he starts saying some real sketch stuff, but nobody cares because he's famous. And speaking of famous, although he has a wife, he goes and hooks up with 2 women upstairs. That's Brad behavior. Definitely not Chad, because doing that to your wife, mega douche move. So Eve is like connected to this dude mentally as the woman experiences the joys of childbirth within literally a few minutes. Patrick later drives out to a barn and drops off the kids because he doesn't want that responsibility. He goes to his senator father's house later as Patrick tells him that he's scared. The senator just sort of dismisses it, while the scientist calls a mental hospital to try to get in contact with the guy who was screaming. Literally, he is working on the blood of these people with no PPE, then watches a supercell event, and then does the unthinkable. So the container falls over, spilling, which the blood starts moving on its own, so he touches it. I'm excommunicating him from the science field because I'm assuming this dude got his doctorate from a Cracker Jack box. box. But as it goes into the wall, well, it becomes a hand and then tears out his guts, silencing this loose end. They did, however, bring Laura in on it and find that the DNA is similar, but Eve hasn't gotten out, so clearly there's another one of these things running around. So we now meet Press once more, freeing an embassy and getting in his car after. Yes, that is definitely what it would be like. There would be no military vehicles or police cars anywhere, nothing like that. The general then arrives, offering him $1 million tax-free, which in the 90s, that's a lot of money. So as Press gets let into the facility with the general, it apparently ruins Laura's attempt to keep Eve away from men, which, hold up, I want to point something out. That guard, like next to the entrance of the actual room that Eve is in, has some broad shoulders. That's all I'm saying. Looks potentially like it could be a male. Anyhow, Eve gets hot and bothered by the men, as one does, and Press and Laura have it out, because apparently after the first movie, it didn't work out. I mean, the guy literally told you that he's basically a huge tool, and you're like, oh no, I can fix them. I'm shocked. So then they head to the mental hospital to talk to the guy there. Turns out the meteorite from Mars that contained fossils that apparently only exist in the Magellanic Galaxy 100 million light years away, and it's not even a galaxy. I mean, I guess it's a dwarf galaxy, but really it's a cloud. I have no idea where they got this information or how they even would suggest, like supposedly according to a type of element, that's where it's from. I don't know, flimsy at best. Apparently Mars was visited by this species 1 billion years ago, which rendered the planet inert. My money is more on the lack of atmosphere because it was stripped away by the lack of a magnetosphere, which allowed for solar flares to blow it away. Or maybe it was a species from another galaxy. No, you're the nerd here. Anyways, the guy said, don't go there because there could still be DNA on the planet. He then got fired from Stanford because the government wants to put an outpost on Mars, which I tend to agree with. We need to get off this rock if we're actually going to survive as a species, because all we really need is one big asteroid hitting us and it's game over for humanity. If we were multi-planet, we could easily recover. Well, not easily, it'd still be difficult, but it's a hell of a lot better than trying to exist on one planet with an asteroid having just glassed everything. But this prompted a fist fight between him and a general in the Pentagon, so he got sent here. As they discuss this issue, they realize that they need to find the astronauts immediately, as it's been about 10 days. Patrick's wife is then getting frisky with him later that night, but he protests, which he doesn't really go anywhere, so she ends up biting the dust for her persistence. Meanwhile, Anne is with her husband as they get frisky, and she's immediately impregnated, and it takes out her husband, and then she meets her end. Dennis is heading to a yacht to get some action, but as he goes to seal the deal, the woman screams as a bunch of dudes show up and have him at force multiplier point. At least give this man like a second to relax, you know? So they analyze the blood and ask him about how they lost contact with Earth. He doesn't remember, and neither does anyone else. They then test Dennis's blood, and they get like amped up and like take it to an 11. Like there's almost a situation. For what reason, I don't know. He's already sitting there. It's fine. Like a bit of patience would do wonders here, but the blood comes back clean at literally the last second, I guess, before they just like open fire on him, and it shows that he does not have the infection. In an autopsy, I can't show you, as I enjoy monetization on this channel, because you know, mortgage and food and gas from the car. Anyways, Anne has one tentacle come out of her head. Patrick then wakes up to find his wife has gotten decimated, so he goes to decimate his own face. Also, player 3 has entered the game as it's standing on the other side of the bed. Dennis arrives to confront him and finds out he's on the porch with a force multiplier. So I'm gonna just have to tell you what happens. Basically, he gives his brain some fresh air, but his head grows back, and Dennis witnesses like the whole thing. He completely nopes out of there, running back to his car as Patrick then gets back up and goes inside. Same, bro. Dennis goes back to tell the team what's going on, as they don't know really how to proceed. Patrick is now going on a spree. Crazy how all these women are looking for dates, right? Look, and they all need naps too. They're so tired. How kind of Patrick to get them to their own rooms. Hitting basically every place he can, he keeps bringing up the newly formed Hellspawns back to his growing young adult army. Laura at this point has completely abandoned the concept of keeping testosterone away from Eve. And Eve at this point says that she wants to help Laura find out how to combat this thing. Why exactly? Even after she's been told it's going to be very painful. You know what? I don't buy that this is actually what an alien human hybrid would be cool with. That doesn't make any sense. Like, these aliens don't even like humans. So they link her mind to Patrick's somehow, and she's able to see what he sees, suggesting that this is kind of like a hive mind scenario. She calls out his location as Patrick hones in on a woman at a grocery store. Standing next to the cereal box, I can't imagine a better pickup line than your face literally being on a cereal box. As Preston and Dennis then run in there, they're prompted to like run out of the stairs that are in the store? What? So Patrick throws her into a van and then they run past it, but one of the vans are rocking, so they come a knocking and find a dude as Patrick sends the woman out as Eve and him like connected randomly. They bring him back to the lab at this point where Eve starts having a moment. Patrick attacks the guards and then goes to say hey to her, and apparently they are like linked up mentally. my god. I thought this was about infecting other species, not hooking up with one another, but apparently not. The general now goes to the senator to show that his son was infected. The senator basically tells the general to suck a railroad spike, he won't give up his son. Dennis now goes to see Eve, but she apparently isn't interested, which prompts Laura to realize that because he is a carrier of sickle cell, the alien DNA can't deal with human genetic diseases. Meanwhile, back at the farm upstate where the kids actually are, the senator confronts Patrick to get him to help, but Patrick just ends up taking him out by accident because the tentacles have their own plans. Laura goes to Eve to ask for help tracking down Patrick, but she doesn't want to play ball all of a sudden, and Patrick's children now ascend into the roof to become cocoons. They decide to use some of Dennis's blood as a toxin as Eve then breaks out. Dude, get some thicker glass. Like, are you joking? So Eve now escaped. Like, the first one escaped through thin glass, so then you use glass again. I'm sorry, that's just dumb. You're just asking for her to escape. But anyways, they light her up, but of course this doesn't work long term because she has super healing. Apparently Eve also learned how to drive from Dukes of Hazzard. Taking off, she's really feeling it, Mr. Krabs, as somehow she outdrives a helicopter arriving at the farm to find that they're met with tentacles everywhere. Eve finds Patrick as then they start hooking up. And again, I thought this was about converting a species. At this point, the small aliens are waking up as a group gets attacked. They also are spraying like portions of Dennis's blood all over anything, or at least like the genetic information for sickle cell. I feel like you could have done this with anything. It doesn't really matter. So they've gone full alien now with a male and female. Laura then yells to Eve that she needs her help, and for some reason, it makes zero sense. She complies. So out of all the crap happening, the painful test, the confinement, her being separated from her own species, not allowed to have any more of her species, you know, that would probably make you not like someone, right? But she just kind of complies, even though she's been trying to get some action this whole time. No shot this female alien is helping you. Boo this woman. But of course she does, so she sends spikes through the Malian. Did you like that, by the way? This upsets him as he just yeets her across the map. He then splits his head and bites her two arms and tentacles her mouth, which, God. And anyways, this apparently takes her out through suffocation. So, I mean, I suppose that was pretty easy. So now it's just your good old-fashioned human on alien violence. Press does the most heroic thing and stabs Dennis in the leg with a rusty pitchfork. I'm sure that won't be an issue later. And then spears the Malian in the back, introducing the genetic disease into him. This causes him to just sort of melt on the floor, as I'm assuming he can't breathe. And Eve appears to be donezo as Laura laments. It's not like she was really that cool of an alien person. I don't really get it. So they load her up and take Dennis into another helicopter as he starts barking up that tree. And then everything is all good. Or is it? As a cat jumps on her, oh no, young adult in the corner. And Eve is pregnant, creating more. So now it's time to play a game of this is not the same young adult from Species 2 to Species 3. No! Over the radio, there's something playing, which is the concept of we started messing around with atomic capabilities, and that's when aliens finally started to notice us, which arguably, I mean, maybe. But then again, maybe we just got more interesting. So we head back to the ambulance from the earlier transporting of Eve at the end of Species 2, headed to some unknown location. As the driver drives along, he starts saying some alien sympathy nonsense, which is complete heresy. As they keep going, the guy in the passenger seat is a little sketched. The driver then pulls a force multiplier on him as the kid in the back literally just attacks with the glass and pops the passenger's head like a cherry tomato. Also, that is not the same kid from earlier. I'm just saying, when Species 2 dropped off and Eve is back up giving birth to the kid, he just goes ham and attacks her. I don't know. Stop asking. I don't know what's going on with this movie. So, Driver Man then takes off with the baby and leaves the other kid behind, and the soldiers never find him apparently, as this Dr. Loomis wannabe shows up and checks things out. Thank God the government is here. We are safe. He gives the order to find the driver, but as we will find out, it won't happen. Moving over to the fusion reactor, which is hilarious to think that this was in the early 2000s. We had assumed we could pull that off, maybe in like 2030 or 2040. Anyways, he's giving a tour to get funding for the reactor, but nobody appears to be impressed, probably because he didn't flip it on and then change the conversation over to mac and cheese. Brilliant. Back at the driver's house, you're about to get mega confused. I mean, by all accounts, Species 2 and 3 takes place in 1998 and 2004 respectively, so 6 years has passed. But even with that, this grunt who was driving a medical military vehicle somehow becomes a professor at a college and appears fairly prestigious, unless, of course, he somehow broke into a military ambulance, nobody recognized that he wasn't supposed to be there, and then stole one of these things. But then how would he even know about it in the first place? None of this makes any sense. Seems like quite the jump. But now I'm just kind of giving plot away, so moving on. But also the timeline for the kid doesn't make sense either, which we'll get into. So at the driver's house, his cat heads downstairs and immediately gets got as we pan over to Dean running the class. As he gets in, the professor is upset with him for being late. They then get into a conversation about viruses and how Dean thinks they should be eradicated. I tend to agree. Maybe not all viruses, viruses, but definitely the bad ones. The professor tells him it's dumb because take smallpox, for instance. Humanity has all but eradicated it in real life because it absolutely wrecks our bodies. Smallpox is some bad stuff. Well, at the CDC, it's slated to be destroyed. Now, was it? Remains to be seen. Probably better to keep some of it around to synthesize a vaccine should a natural source ever be discovered and accidentally released. Saying this upsets the professor, and he walks out. So now it's corner time with Roanoke. First off, this professor is an idiot. There are good viruses, don't get me wrong. Some of them can be used to treat illnesses and are actually a part of our microbiome. And take CRISPR, for instance, we can literally use it as a gene editing tool, or at least a delivery method for a gene editing tool. But getting upset over the eradication of smallpox, all credibility is lost there. Now, arguably he's angry because Dean sees it as like a dead-end species that needs to be eradicated, to which transferences happen, and he's like, oh, you're actually talking about my young adult I'm keeping in the basement. And the professor gets upset because it's talking about life. Anyways, but no, smallpox can get the curb stomp 100% of the time, every time, and humanity would be better for it. I suppose this dunce also believes that the biological bitch known as cancer is a good thing too, because life, laughable to say the least. Didn't think I'd turn up this much over that. Back to the movie. So as Dean walks outside, some dude shoulder checks him and calls him a speciesist. And this dude was ahead of his time for his terminology, because, you know, we have a ton of terminology now. So Dean gets called over by the department head to tell him that the funding is being pulled as the professor overhears it. Meanwhile, back at the prof's house, also known as Dr. Abbott, he heads into the basement to find his cat, which is a little sad. Then heading to the rapidly growing young adult that he's got trapped in there, she says she's hungry. She picked the lock and now wants lobster because kids are expensive. So he goes and gets lobster as she eats it in the most Chad-like way possible. They then eat some Sarah Lee, as they now name her Sarah because she reads the word Sarah. Abbott tells her that she's an alien, so she's special, and her childhood only lasts days, not years. Meanwhile, back at the autopsy table, Eve is donezo. She was pregnant, to which Agent Wash becomes alarmed at. Back in Dr. Abbott's office, okay, again, see, this doesn't make any sense. Timeline. So the dude that just banged on the door is actually the kid from the ambulance, and the girl is the girl he carried away from the ambulance, right? So entering adulthood takes at least at most a few days. So how in the name of all that is holy did this guy go from an ambulance driver to a doctor working at a college? It doesn't make any sense. I swear, they don't even know their own lore. But anyways, I was told this was a 4.5 star out of 5 on then I looked up on other sites and it was actually like a 1 star, so it's probably not supposed to make sense. So this dude is crashing out fast. His lungs are full of viruses and pollen, things that we can most likely survive, but it's sending this human-alien hybrid into shock. As Dr. Abbott administers some antihistamine, he flatlines out, asking where the girl is. He says the others are sick as well, and they're coming for him. Well, then his guts burst open and reveal tentacles, and I'm guessing the antihistamine didn't work so well. Back in the classroom, Dr. Abbott summoned Dean. He has a proposition for him. He wants to show Dean the guy that came to his office. And back at Abbott's house, however, the girl begins to enter her metamorphosis. As Dean pokes the human-alien hybrid, he realizes, hey, you know, this thing is different. Abbott wants Dean to come in on his research of all of this, and they will both be famous. Isolate and synthesize a human completely resistant to all diseases on Earth. They will be more famous than Nobel himself. Back at Abbott's, I have no idea why the department head just shows up and breaks in, and then he finds Sarah, who's obviously, like the rest of her species, just hanging out in her birthday suit. She at first gets frisky and then says, never mind, but the department head ain't done yet. He goes over to her to swing for the fences, but she says no again, as she becomes extra angry and then puts tentacles through his head. Remember, no means no. Abbott and Dean now arrive back at the house to find what's left of the cocoon, then discover Dr. Turner. Dr. Abbott convinces him not to call the cops because, you know, Dr. Turner did just pull funding away from Dean, and that would look kind of suspicious. Dean says he wants shared credit on this, not the ending of Dr. Turner, but, you know, when they synthesize basically a completely resistant human to all diseases. So it's officially a deal. Now, to hide Dr. Turner, heading to a random swamp, they drag him and drop him. They now need to look for Sarah, but she's at a frat party, and having been in a fraternity myself, like, this is some serious knuckle dragging, as dudes are literally just getting thrown like, oh, cool, it's my turn to be thrown by the ridiculously, mysteriously strong woman. I'm sure this isn't a problem. Like, no, that's not how it works. Later that night, as Sarah leaves the party, a woman is concerned about her and gives her a ride home. No good deed goes unpunished, though. She mentions something about aliens and then approaches a train track. Sarah can feel more of her kind. As she gets out, one dude on the train sees her as she gives chase, but then gets her arm caught under the train. But she gets up and her arm regrows, which scares the woman, as this took at least probably 10 years off the old lifespan. The guy inside then takes more medicine and continues on his merry way. Back at the dorm, I'm even more confused. Why would, I'm assuming, a graduate student who is put in charge of showing a fusion reactor be sleeping in what appears to be a freshman dorm? This movie is all over the place. But his dorm mate wakes him up as Dean then heads to class on a Sunday, only it isn't class. Dr. Abbott is in the process of doing an autopsy on the hybrid. As Dean enters, he gets grabbed by Sarah, who isn't thrilled that he's there. Abbott tells him not to tell her anything. The hybrid's immune system is almost non-existent, and clearly the body is attacking itself as these are unfamiliar tissues. Basically, the body isn't built correctly from factory. Sarah now comes down to tell him that she's going out. Abbott isn't concerned as there's no genetic partner that she'd be interested in, as there's no other pure species. Yeah, that really holds up in light of the first two movies. Hey, where did you get that idea? So, plot hole number 498 aside, Abbott says he already took all of Sarah's eggs anyway, so they don't really have to worry about anything. Alrighty then. Sarah then spots Red-Eyed Monster Man in a hotel as they start getting frisky. She says that he has a sickness and then pushes him off, which makes him upsetty. She then heads back home to find Dean inside. He shows her how to play chess, which she immediately knows how, and also then whoops him at, because she's an alien. He then burns his hand like a scrub and then heads back to his dorm. As his roommate is on the computer, he finds a woman has put out an ad looking for like some serious lab information about molecular biology, like PhD in molecular biology. We are cavemen to these things. But it also appears as though the Gooberman has found her. Back down in the basement, any reason to take your shirt off, am I right? They draw some blood from Sarah as she chooses Dean to draw the blood rather than Abbott, which they aren't attracted to humans, but Commander Shepard has taught me different. As they do, a tentacle emerges from the roof and then grabs her. Dean runs in to help as it's doing stuff to Sarah, and he's getting upset. Well, I really didn't need to see any of this. Also, the very obvious cabling and harness system to pull these people and aliens up to the roof is hilarious. It's always their hips that fly up first. So Dean helps Sarah, bad idea, and then Abbott attacks the male, even worse idea, because he gets yeeted and stabbed with a tentacle that opens up a hole in his chest, and the male succumbs to his wounds, and a few minutes later, so does Abbott. But before that, Abbott tells Dean about the hybrids and how they'll keep coming, so good luck, as then he drops out. It's now just Dean and Sarah against the world. He also goes full stupid, thinking that this thing needs to know any info, because he tells her about the eggs having been harvested. Bruh, she doesn't need to know that, dummy. But because of old loose lift sink ships over here, things are gonna get a lot worse. He gives Abbott a nice burial in the swamp Viking style, wrapping up that partnership. Heading back to Abbott's, he tries to find Sarah, but she's nowhere to be found. Surprise, surprise. Heading to the basement, I'm assuming he's getting rid of Data, but as he heads to college, he sees Sarah entering the music department. Sarah then jumps Dean's bones, and all of a sudden, when he was supposed to be sus about her, he starts thinking with the wrong brain, and then he's like, oh yeah, equivalent exchange. Until then, he kind of sees her true form, and the big brain comes back into play, and this makes Sarah angry. His roommate at this point mentions how he got into contact with Amelia, and she's coming by. The roommate also read Dean's journal, which, good lord, this man keeps a journal. And then we get this scene. Amelia shows up at the gas station and heads to the bathroom. She's got a rash, but then the owner comes back there and decides that they should hook up, as one does. So they get frisky in a gross bathroom, and she eats his brain, or at least pokes a hole through it, which completely destroys the central nervous system. Probably not very painful, but looks painful. And this takes me back to 18-year-old Roanoke freshman in college. I met like a 28-year-old woman named Amelia on the internet randomly. She shows up, and for some reason we drive from Huntsville, Alabama to Birmingham. I actually thought there was a good chance I was going to be sacrificed. Kind of looks similar to this woman too. I tell you this story because do not, under any circumstances, no matter how much you get to brag to your friends later, do what I did, because that was not one of my better ideas. But hey, I'm still here today. USA, baby. Where was I? Yes. Okay. So basically the jig is up and the news is out. She knows that that's not really the guy who's got the molecular information and is upset. As Dean gets back to his dorm, he spots her, and that's like way too hot of a woman to be with his roommate willingly. So he runs off to some random girl's room. She gets got, but then feels Sarah's nearby. He sees his roommate get thrown into a car and then runs out there only to find Agent Wash sitting in his car sweating a lot. They begin talking about the alien species, and the agent comes out and says, hey, I'm an agent. Here in an unofficial capacity though. Dean then heads back to his dorm, and they make a plan. Meanwhile, the roommate is in Abbott's lab. Amelia then sticks a piece of rebar through his God, ow! I mean, the femoral artery runs in that triangle right there, so hopefully that didn't get nicked. And actually, interestingly, just for your own information, there is something known as the femoral triangle, which basically has a lot of arteries very close to the top of the skin, not a lot of bone. No, well, there's no bone protecting it. Not a lot of muscle. You basically have your groin muscle right there. Basically, the reason humans have this massive weak point is because once upon a time when we were quadrupedal, that was not an accessible location, and over time it became accessible because we stood up. So it's kind of funny. It's like the greater omentum on humans, right? The greater omentum is there, and it basically lays against the abdominal muscle on the inside, so that if you ever got stabbed, if you were like, say, leaning over, walking on all fours, the greater omentum would go into that stab point to stop bleeding and stop your organs from leaking out. But because humans stand upright, our greater omentum just sort of hangs against the abdomen, so if you get stabbed, well, it's not really gonna do anything. In fact, if you're actually interested about this stuff, the human body has like a ridiculous amount of weak points. We are built with like like duct tape and shoestring. Anyways, the point is hopefully the femoral artery did not get nicked. Amelia then goes upstairs and throws up oatmeal, and Sarah stands outside like a weirdo as she watches them, saying that, you know what, this isn't my problem. Several hours later, the agent and Dean finally leave his dorm. The roommate actually has made some progress with the ova, and I'd probably already been game-ended by now. But thank God, the government is here to save the day. Roommate limps out as the aliens give chase. They go to the fusion reactor as the guard gets sliced in half Slither style by the alien. Running inside, they resolve to destroy the chasing aliens. Old Blue Eyes alien hybrid begins her attack as Dean opens the reactor. Also, Amelia has entered the game. She stabs Dean and starts making out with him. I don't know, man. This whole thing is a fever dream. What's even more weird is this rustles the jimmies of Sarah, who's now angry that Amelia is moving in on like her human when she's displayed absolutely zero interest the whole time. So the eggs fall into the reactor while Amelia was getting hot and bothered. I'm guessing this is what makes Sarah angry. I don't really know. None of this makes sense. But maybe she's angry because she can't have kids. Maybe that's it. So Dean then closes the reactor after Amelia fell in, and the reactor was able to vaporize her. So the government thanks the two, although tax-free $1 million would be preferable. But as expendable roommate goes to Abbott's, it's cleared out, but he finds a child is in there, and also Sarah. He then runs out and finds Dean working in the lab. So he had a great plan. He helped up Sarah out of the reactor, and because of that, they're like totally besties now. He engineered her a boyfriend, but made him sterile, so they will both live out the rest of their lives, trying to make more of each other, but never succeeding. Apparently, Dean altered the chromosomes. Okay, bro. And that means we have wrapped up the trilogy. And look, I'm gonna level with you. There's a fourth movie, but after reading the reviews, I don't think my brain can take any more alien on human action. At this point, it just has to be done and stay that way. This alien species is a bit of an enigma based on the way it traverses the stars, or maybe doesn't even traverse the stars, and even according to its own lore of the actual movie itself, this may be understandable. Let me explain. The first thing we know about this species is it responded to humanity in a way that was actually quite passive, and despite the passage of time and coming into contact with our genetic information via SETI, it did not appear to actually ever show up in any capacity. Hailing from the Magellanic Cloud, you may be asking yourself where that even is. Essentially, there are dwarf galaxies and large clouds of gas, dust, and stars that orbit way out there beyond the spiral arms of the Milky Way galaxy. These areas may also themselves harbor life like any other galaxy could, and in this instance, they do. This species didn't communicate by normal means, but instead used a black hole in order to communicate with humans. See, the issue is with radio signal communication is over time the signals decay into unintelligible nonsense that can't be deciphered. And with this species originating outside of our actual galaxy, it would have been exceedingly difficult to actually get a signal to Earth in order to infect animals with the genetic coding if the coding information was totally screwed to the wall. By sending radio signals through a black hole and having a connection to another black hole, this may seem to suggest that these work as portals more so than just singularity events where nothing ever escapes. Because of this, the information was maintained and able to reach our equipment in order to be implemented. In the events of Species 2, we learned this isn't the first time this species had come across the Sol system. Now, this could suggest, again, two things. The first possibility is that the species was actually spacefaring, and given this same DNA that was linked to Mars as to Earth, it also says the species is billions of years old as Mars dried up a long time ago. Now, the running hypothesis at this point is that Mars was not able to maintain its magnetic field, and this stuff is actually fairly interesting, at least to me, and I'm the dude running the channel, so we're gonna get into it at least for a little while. What happened was there were likely two portions of the iron core on Mars, or at least in Mars. The sulfur-enriched iron portion and the hydrogen-enriched iron portion. At first, these two were homogenized into the same area, and as the hydrogen-enriched iron rose up towards the crust due to it being less dense, this created this magnetic field for a time capable of allowing liquid water and potentially primitive life to exist on Mars. The life part is pure speculation, but we know icy asteroids were hitting Mars, and potentially it may have had at one point in time more water on its surface than Earth does now. However, once the hydrogen-rich iron had finally fully separated and gotten far enough away from the sulfur-enriched iron, this stopped the magnetic field from existing any further as the power drained from it over time, resulting in a weaker and weaker magnetic field until complete loss was all but inevitable, which then allowed for solar winds to strip away the atmosphere and boil away the oceans, leaving the desert planet we see today. Kind of a bummer, actually. Imagine if we had a planet literally next door, or at least literally anything habitable that we could space race to. We would have been trying to leave our planet decades ago. Oh well, gotta work with what you got. But back on track, basically this thriving world appeared to have a species much like ours, or potentially like ours, it could have been quadrupedal, that came into contact with genetic information, as at this time the species may have been spreading their own kind across the cosmos physically. If this was the case, then that means that Mars may have been overtaken by force and the animals there were subdued. The second possibility is much like how Earth was invaded. What came as a Trojan virus of sorts, seeing as the species would know a less intelligent species species would struggle with energy production, sends a benevolent advancement with a malicious infection. The prey species, thinking, oh, this must be good for our genetics, implements it, which then begins the alteration of the entire species until the whole planet is consumed. Also, take a shot every time I say species. Good lord, it doesn't help that this movie is called Species. In this paragraph alone, you're probably going to the hospital. Species. Personally, judging by how lazy the process seems for humanity, I think the Martians fell a lot like, the Earthlings almost did. It's a very passive and energy-conserving way of spreading across the stars, because let's face it, even our own galaxy and outlying satellites, they're extremely far away from one another. The clouds that this predator race hails from is over 100 million light years away, so without warp drives, you're not going to be able to traverse that in any capacity. However, with that said, judging by their ability to utilize black holes and humanity's own understanding being applied to potential FTL or faster than light way of traveling, black holes may be the key that you can utilize them to compress space in front of you and then travel through that space. But we are like ways away from even banging two rocks together to try to start making tech like that. So back to the aliens. So my thinking with them is this. First, potentially back in their distant past, they may have traveled to the stars and may have actually sent out scouting parties, but after grappling with just how much energy and resources it would take to do so, and possibly even finding so few planets in our galaxy, they turned towards spreading their kind by altering the sapient creatures of a planet once they made themselves known. This could help to explain why Mars was targeted first and Earth was never even known about, because if you were an alien race who came across a habitable planet and knew a third one that was just a little closer to the sun, was just out there, wouldn't you have checked it out? Rodinia was actually formed during this time period about 1 billion years ago. However, there's really only algae-like multicellular land plants at the time, so it may not have been as viable of a target. But the response time once SETI was up and running maybe seems like Earth was marked for future infection should life continue to sapience. Once it was confirmed that this did happen, the signal was sent and the invasion began, all without the aliens even really having to physically show up. They were just literally relying on the hubris of sapient animals. From here, I believe where we should actually start now is how the genetic coding is actually implemented, and then move on to the creature that was created as well as the physiology before getting into the non-viability of the hybrids, because who doesn't love a good old-fashioned non-compatible biological abomination? The coding is quite simple. It was sent using the same base pairs that humanity has in its own DNA, which seems to suggest that, at least in this instance, the biological components of all species in the stars are the same. Either that or the genome of these aliens was translated into a way into our own amino acids to create something like ourselves. How did that work exactly? Well, likely not all that well. Working with genes isn't like translating a language, unfortunately. More in the sense that if you have completely different amino acids than humans have, you are not likely to find a sequence or base pair that is going to properly express exactly how a base pair of an alien genome would. Because of this, they would need to have compatible genetics on a fundamental level. Now, as we will learn later, just because the base pairs are compatible doesn't mean the information is good to go. You shouldn't just cram random information into your genetics. Once this coding was sent and received by humanity, what's interesting is they were able to essentially insert this coding into the genes of an egg that was fertilized. This is no small feat back in the 90s. But then again, a fusion reactor was being talked about and casually built, so we would have to assume that technology in this universe was further along than our own. I'm not saying it couldn't have been done, it would just be difficult. In fact, this may suggest that at that time frame, something like CRISPR was around. If you don't know what CRISPR is, essentially it's using a virus to deliver a genetic payload like it usually does, which then you can use it to encode into the actual DNA of a person. I remember talking to a buddy of mine who's actually working for a company utilizing CRISPR to solve genetic diseases. They seem to be having an issue with the body kind of going back and trying to correct the already corrected gene, which is actually pretty interesting, as it seems to show there's a template memory of sorts. Even when the gene is in there, the body still tries to get rid of it. This would make sense to a degree with things like DNA viruses. You can't just have a bunch of DNA added to your genome and expect the body to be cool with it. Anyhow, I'm kind of getting sidetracked as all get out. One of these sets of genes were entered, and this officially made Syl the hybrid, but in a more pure form. They talk about her as if she's all alien, but she is still very much so human, at least with the traits that we can see. So first and foremost, she looks human, but this is only a facade. It seems the coding sent by the aliens in reality has the alien genes as a scaffolding and the actual structure. The human genes are the facade. Sort of like, say you're building a house and you have everything done, and then you put a stone facade up to make it look like the house is made of stone, but really it's composed of materials most houses are, which is wood. This would suggest that the aliens may have over time genetically manipulated themselves to condense their own genetic profile, and with it may have also added in a few more instructions to manipulate the cell. What I mean by this is clearly most of the genetic information came from humans, or should have, but then the question is, where did it all go? From what I can see, this creature is about 90% alien and 10% human, given very little information that the aliens actually sent added. This would imply a low size nuclei within the genetic sequence may have been a sort of patrolling protein, much like how we have DNA polymerase in our own cells, which could go in and manipulate the DNA to continue it on a path of being an alien rather than a human. And this would be paramount to their success, as clearly this species wouldn't just want hybrids. They would want their own kind to control the planet. Over time, this would edge out the native animals on that planet just for themselves. As you can see, this whole process is much more nefarious than just banging another animal out of existence like we did to Neanderthals. You can actually see this genetic information being not so expansive with how the hybrids do not do so well. When a human has relations with an alien, this creates these hybrids, which creates a problem for the information. It appears as though the process requires a group to be hybridized by the original genetic profile instead of just one who goes on to hook up with humans. Because humanity didn't do this, this may have been our saving grace, because once the hybridized humans go on to hook up with humans, too much DNA, or at least too much human DNA, gets in the way. As the hypothesized protein complex goes in and tries to remove human genes, it may accidentally remove more key points, such as immunological responses. Because remember, it was a sperm and an egg that made all of us. All the information was there, from specialization of cells to growth to personality. Our genotypes are highly important. If any of that is compromised, it creates issues further down the line. In the events of Species 2, all the half-breeds, as they're called, created by the astronaut hooking up with humans, are incredibly unstable due to the issue of genetic tampering, allowing for the cellular markers to become unrecognizable by the cell, causing the human immune system to attack the body, basically causing these hybrids to start succumbing to autoimmune disorders. And this suggests that either the immune system becomes aware of the alien DNA, or at least cells infected with the alien DNA, which even is itself, and potentially the markers on the surface of the cell are showing up as foreign, or the immune cells are damaged like the rest of the genetic makeup of all the cells, causing them to go haywire and attack everything. And if you didn't know, the reason I say that actually some of our personality is dictated by genetics, you get your temperament from your parents, not environmental factors. So it's genetic. But why doesn't this happen originally is because the first copy is more closely related to humans concerning key functions such as immune system. Areas of the genome would be spared to create the phenotypes necessary to survive on a planet. A phenotype being an observable trait, whether that be height, hair, blood type, skin color, etc., are all caused by the genome. And this would be critical to the success of this species, because having an alien immune system on Earth would go the way of the War of the Worlds. But then the copies of the copies cause genetic aberrations to build up, leading to their end. The bypass, as mentioned previously to this, is hybrids hooking up with hybrids. It's clear that this species can sense one another in the area, but the issue is because there are no pure forms, because again, it's like taking a copy and copying it, issues tend to become magnified. And this means the genetic damage is sensed by the pure form, which is why she will reject a mate. But the issue is this species apparently can get frustrated still because of this rejection and just go for it anyways. It is unknown if this is an alien trait or not, but I would say it likely isn't. Due to this species' ability to absolutely genetically manipulate itself and others, this implies there is no genetic defects amongst its own species, or they've been corrected. And because of that, this behavior likely stems from the human aspect of the genome. Because remember, we're still friggin' cavemen. Well, some of us. With the genetic predisposition covered, let's move on to how exactly do these genes of these aliens affect their morphology. So first and foremost, these aliens appear to be rather reptilian. They have long linear scales, or at least chitinous material all over their body. They are bipedal in most cases, but there is a slight problem with that being applied across the board, and that is with the male version of this alien. The female version is bipedal, but that was a human creation, and with that information sent from the aliens themselves. They may be bipedal, but the male was also quadrupedal, and the pure form, which is the most strange of all, looked like a blob. Now, that may have just been because it was really early on in its formation process and it hadn't taken its actual true form yet, but we've got males that are bipedal, or excuse me, we've got females that are bipedal, we've got males that are quadrupedal, and then we've got the pure forms, which are just, again, blobs. So it's kind of it's a little bit interesting to see what's creating what. But bipedalism comes from the actual source, at least it appears, because the initial genetic coding allows for the species it's infecting to set the stage for how it walks so that it blends in. However, with the astronauts from Mars, when they were infected, they're contaminated with the genetic coding from the aliens that lived on Mars as well. So when entering their alien form, at least with Patrick, he was quadrupedal due to possibly the combination of the alien coding and what was originally located on Mars that was infected. And this may be also why the immunological interactions were fairly horrible, because the body may have been contaminated with information from this species on Mars's immune system, and it was non-compatible with our homegrown microbial biome. So basically, Specifically, speaking on the pure human-alien hybrid as the male, that was a combination of potentially 3 species, leading to its physiological differences, and they appear quite human, but are clearly alien. So, starting with the feet, at least for the female, we can assume they are pretty much like a human's foot. Not much is known about them, but if memory serves, I don't remember seeing them all that much. But due to the human genetic influence, it's clear they would have a plantigrade structuring like we have. The legs continue up in their normal structuring of human leg, as mentioned. Chitinous armoring does cover the entire body, and offshoots of spike protrusions on the legs have been seen, but the reasoning behind them is the protruding armoring kind of helps more than anything. The abdomen is fairly human-like, with what appears to be mammalian traits on the chest. Can't show you, but I'm just gonna have to tell you that rather than being mammalian and producing milk, they instead house tentacles that can be used in its attacks. On the back of these creatures, long sharp spikes can protrude out of the spinal area, which may possibly hint that socially this species does engage in non-consensual activities with one another. Because of this, the female developed a way to just straight up stab the male if she deemed him, non-genetically perfect for her. Moving up to the head and the face, it's a little different than a human's. The faces are similar with the mouth, the nose, large eyes. However, a crest appears on the sides of the face, likely, again, as armoring with a few chitinous protrusions coming out the top of the head. It almost makes these things look like the Asari. And I'm really starting to wonder, with the Asari propensity towards hooking up with every sapient species in the galaxy and using their genes to make more of themselves, and these things looking like the Asari, if the Asari actually aren't just based on this species. Anyhow, these things are definitely more animalistic, as they possess sharp teeth that clearly show they are carnivores, which, given likely their own evolutionary history, if they just aren't complete blobs, this would make sense considering protein is needed to make them smart as they are, and that means they likely would have to hunt on their own planet like we did on ours. And their bipedalism means that they could run down animals, assuming they are bipedal on their planet, and they actually may have been persistent hunters like ourselves. It is mentioned in the movie that they have forward-facing eyes, and that denotes them as predators. At least Mr. Empath says that. This is true in the case for us, but it's not always the rule. Look at gorillas. Forward-facing eyes, but they are not hunters. Moving back to the intellect for a moment, this kind of leads us into the internal anatomy. These creatures, for one reason or another, have semi-transparent organs. Now, why this is the case is unknown, but during the autopsy of the hybrid creatures, their organs are clear in some portions entirely, looking almost like plastic. Probably because in the movie, they are plastic, but there is a reason to show them as such. All pigmentation appears focused on the outside of the body, but internally, they are clear. Their ability with the females to reproduce lies in their actual chests rather than their abdomen, like with humans. However, it appears both areas will allow them to become pregnant. Concerning musculature, these creatures are well beyond human strength in many ways. Able to throw full-grown men, this would suggest that muscular density and contractility is well beyond that of Homo sapiens' ability, which also hints at bone strength being higher as well. Now, internally, one of the things that would also be encoded for, which again, judges show that likely there is some genetic manipulation in the information that all these aliens sent over, is that things are absolutely ludicrous at healing. While not invincible, as they can be burned or have their brain case separated from their body leading to their end, they can absolutely survive a lot of things that could easily and would easily take out a human. This would mean that within that coding, an increased mitotic ability has clearly been added in. This not only allows for the creature to heal from damage to the body, but when first becoming pregnant or forming themselves, they're able to grow at a rapid pace, reaching adulthood in days, becoming reproductively viable, and this would be invaluable for taking over a planet. Now, one of the things I will say, rounding back to genetics for a moment, is the metamorphosis stage. It would appear to me that this increased mitotic ability does initially have them probably mostly as humans, right? But once they enter metamorphosis and enter that cocoon, much like a butterfly completely melting down and reforming into something else, this is likely what happens to the young adult that enters the cocoon. They completely melt down, their genetics absolutely change, and then they become mostly alien in the adult life, whereas when they were younger, they were probably about 50-50. So finally, we get to the intellect, which is well beyond a human's. Able to grasp concepts almost immediately, this shows that their cells metabolically and physically likely move at a faster pace than humanity's. Connections are made neurologically in seconds rather than months to understand and grasp concepts completely foreign to them, such as, say, human language or even something like chess. This would also be why they are so critically concerned with genetic stability. It seems the species may have initially had an incredibly short lifespan, and when they first formed on their planet, this was probably an issue. So in order to not have diseases propagate easily throughout their society, genetic profiles became the most important aspect of their interactions, which is why they developed such an innate ability to detect it. It's pretty brutal, as this would leave anyone out with any issues, which is also why they callously send humans packing who may have genetic damage. But this is also hilarious because most of us likely have genetic damage in one way or another. Over time, as their society grew and with their intellect growing with it, they could quickly adapt mentally, and this would likely start to sort of phase out their own genetic issues and give themselves longer lives and allow for them to start spreading amongst the stars by signals. This species is one that takes a very passive approach when invading. Humanity in no way had to add this into its genetic coding or into the genome of Syl, but because of this apparent benevolence shown with the limitless fuel, it's a trap, which, I mean, let's be real here. Once humanity built it and built these creatures, that just means that species would have the infrastructure to work with what was already built by us and allow them to propagate even further. So basically, this alien species would just completely trick scientists who couldn't help but incorporate this sequence into our own species genetics. However, it's clear that once this is done, the human genes are sliced up, especially during metamorphosis, in favor of the aliens ones. And this is likely because of the hypothesized protein complex encoded within that sequence for the alien sequence. Ultimately, this creates an incredibly smart, strong, and potent version of something that looks like a human as cover, but it's pretty much all alien underneath. And this raises the largest question of all. Would you? Don't lie to yourself. You're totally getting ganked in a hot tub, aren't you? But I'd like to thank you guys for watching this long episode. Maybe actually the longest I've ever done. I'm not actually sure. So I hope I covered everything adequately and all of your curiosities towards what in the name of all those holy was this has been answered. So Roanoke Tales is back on the menu, except I'll be taking a different direction. I want to discuss cryptids over there, their lore, where they come from, all that good stuff. I'll still probably be doing creepypastas occasionally, but I definitely want to do more in the way of what I've just described. Anyhow, I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and channel links in the description. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our two astronauts, Lipsy Gingy and Wesley A. Weaver Jr. Thank you guys. I'd also like to thank our astrophysicist, Des Dancer, and Phoenix, as well as our scientist, Countryside Limbo, and Seth Johnson. The rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping everything running and is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. Have a good Thanksgiving. And when this comes out, it's already past Thanksgiving. So I hope you had a good Thanksgiving, and I'll see y'all in the next one.